et cetera. So we're going to move towards convening. If members will take your seats, please. Good morning, members. For those of you who are joining us online or in the audience, I'm Trey Price. I'm the chair of the State Affordable Housing Workgroup for 2017. Appreciate everyone coming and that everyone's here on time. For housekeeping purposes, wanted to mention we plan to meet at 10 a.m. The remainder of the meetings, we have 2 other meetings scheduled. The third meeting will be October 30th at the Miami Airport Marriott. We will meet at 10 a.m. And then the final meeting is scheduled for November 29th at the Capitol. We'll be in 412 of the Knott Building. So make sure, I hope you can make that meeting, and that's where we'll be actually voting on the final recommendations. Then we'll have our charge wrapped up and ready to go for the presentation to the final meeting this year of the Florida Housing Finance Board of Directors on December 8th. Real quickly, want to mention restrooms for everyone are located outside the room and down the hall on the right-hand side. We will be breaking for 45 minutes for lunch at noon. And with that, I guess we will go ahead and head into the first panel today. I'm sorry?
Good morning, workgroup members. I just wanted to say, for lunch, we're going to hold workgroup members captive. I think we have a room just next door over for you all. We don't want to lose you. Sorry that this is like a forced march. We just don't have a lot of time. So I'm sure there'll be some delicious food over there. And the rest of you, of course, there's a food court downstairs. There's McCoy's just right down the way and all of that. So thank you for your willingness to gobble your food down very quickly to be able to get back here and have more fun.
Great, thank you. And I know we actually do have 2 members who weren't able to make the last meeting. And so real quickly, if we can go around the table and briefly just introduce yourself. And we'll start with Hannah.
Hannah Eskra. Whoops, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, you do need to press the button. So that's green. Yeah.
It was green already. Hannah Eskra, I'm with Gorman and Company.
Hi, I'm Shannon Nasworth with Ability Housing, and I'm here as the advocate for the homeless.
Good morning, I'm Jack Humberg with Boley Centers, and I'm representing individuals with special needs.
Andy Gardner with Orlando Health, and previously in the Florida Center for a little while. So.
Good morning, I'm Margot Graff with Habitat for Humanity of Martin County.
Again, I'm Trey Price, the Executive Director of Florida Housing Finance Corporation and the Chair.
Good morning, Nancy Muller. I'm staff to the work group.
Good morning, Nan Risch, currently a Broward County Commissioner, former state senator, and I'm representing the Florida Association of Counties on this work group.
Good morning, Cheryl Lambert. I'm with Only Way Realties of Citrus County, and I'm also representing the realtors and affordable housing for the consumer, and also the Florida Realtors Secretary of Florida Realtors. Thanks.
Good morning, Holly Croft. I'm an attorney with Broad & Cassell.
Good morning, Mark Cruz with the Governor's Office of Policy and Budget.
Hi, good morning. I'm Julie Dennis. I am the Director of Community Development at the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity. Thank you.
Great, thank you all very much. With that, I guess, we will go ahead and move into our first item on the agenda, which is the rental developer panel. If we have with us today several developers who have been involved in multifamily development over the years, and I'm very excited to hear from each of them. I think what we're looking to do, members, is have each of them make a brief presentation, and then I think we'll have some good discussion back and forth with each member. So I look forward to that. Yep. Nancy?
Members, one of the things that I didn't complete in time to get into your package, but you have as a separate sheet of paper, is this bar chart at your table. This is part of what I believe you all asked of us last time. The developer panel is in response to a particular question, and one of the questions that I felt that you were asking was, what do some different typical deals look like? And this is, these are financing structures. Each of these bar charts represents really an average of a type of development. And so to be clear here, there are no totally sort of special needs developments, very specialized developments that we do. These are three kind of basic types of developments. So the first one is just mainly with 9% housing credits that Florida Housing issues. It's a preservation type deal. And you'll see compared to the bar on the far right side that far fewer credits go into a preservation development because typically, you know, you've got the building already standing, you are doing rehab to that building. Sometimes you're doing substantial rehab to the building to get it, you know, you're putting quite a bit of money into it to get it into good shape, especially some of the older properties in the state that are already affordable housing to start with. And the middle piece of this, the middle bar on this is a classic sale development that is providing gap financing for federal bonds and 4% low-income housing tax credits. So in this case, remember, as we talked about last time, that the two outside bars here, the 9% credits, those are the competitive credits that Florida Housing awards through requests for applications, the sort of very prized funding, because you can see how much equity is being provided, whereas the middle column, it's mainly the sale funding, that kind of stripy middle kind of gray section there that is the competitive award that Florida Housing is making, and of course that sale funding is coming from state appropriation. So that sale funding is allowing that developer to go out and get bond financing and also get the housing credit equity as well. So we can talk more about this. Again, there's some little bit of funkiness in here because there's some averages going on, but it just gives you a sense of some of the different financing sources that go in. And this is today's deals. This isn't 10 years ago, 5 years ago. You know, market's constantly changing, and therefore the need and the amount of financing per type of program or financial source, I guess. So that's all for right now.
Any questions? Any questions about the bar graph? Okay. Well, great. Well, we are very excited to have our rental developer panel, and I'll let each of the panelists introduce themselves as part of their presentation. And thank you all very much for coming. We appreciate it, and look forward to hearing from you and having a back and forth discussion as well about the good work that you folks have done. So thank you so much. I'll start on my far left. Yeah, you can just press the button and it'll light up. Thank you.
Perfect. Hi, I'm Stephanie Berman. I'm the president of Carport Supportive Housing in Miami. We are a not-for-profit developer and operator of supportive housing. So we wear all three hats. We develop our housing, we operate it, and we provide, thank you, the on-site supportive services. We have 21 communities that we've developed in South Florida. We have a range of supportive housing developments that we've done that are fully 100% supportive housing. We have some developments where we've mixed supportive housing with affordable housing, and then some other unique use such as a public library or an organic farm and farmers market. And then we also have some developments that we've done that are strictly your traditional affordable housing. What we typically like to do is the mixture. We find that that works the best. It works the best for the folks living in the building. It works the best for the community that we're coming into. And financially, the developments just work better when you have that mix. The type of financing that we typically use is the 9% tax credits. We've also done some deals without tax credits and just some local sources like Local Home, or Miami's fortunate to have the surtax program. We've also done some preservation deals with NSP funding. We've done some smaller deals. Our smallest deal is 32 units, and our largest deal is 145 units. We like to do something in the middle. 32 we find is too small, and 145 is too big for supportive housing, but somewhere in the middle seems to be what works for us, in the 70 to 90 unit range. I think that was the broad introduction. Is there anything else that I'm missing in? I want to thank you for having a not-for-profit developer on here today, especially someone that does supportive housing, because often that voice is not heard. So thank you for including us today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's great that you're here. Thank you. Mr. Plonskier.
Thank you. My name is Mark Plonskier. I'm the president of the Gatehouse Group. Over the past 25 years, Gatehouse has developed just about every housing type. We began with historic preservation, adaptive reuse of a school in Newport, Rhode Island, a convent in Providence, supposedly the invention and first Naugahyde manufacturing building in Barrington, Rhode Island, an office building in Santa Rosa, California, and several Art Deco hotels on South Beach. We then moved on to garden apartments, and our first garden apartment complex was right here in Orlando, 220 units called the Oasis Club. Actually, it wasn't originally called the Oasis Club. It was originally called Club Goldenrod by our land seller. But since it was a family project, we thought that taking the name of a strip club of the same name about a mile away wasn't really going to be much appreciated. So we changed it with Florida Housing's consent, of course. We have also built developments with single-family homes in West Palm Beach in an urban neighborhood, townhouses in Tampa, and high-rises in Miami. The high-rises are interesting in light of my college studies, which suggested that a high-rise is no place for families. That's what we were taught. I then went to law school, and in law school, my wife and I lived in a high-rise with families, a third of which were low and moderate income residents. It was a fantastic experience. It was a wonderful place to live, and we still have friends 40 years later. In Florida, Gatehouse has only undertaken 100% affordable developments, no mixed income. But in Massachusetts, we've done a number of mixed income projects, 50-50, some 70% affordable, 30% market rate. And the reason we're able to do it in Massachusetts is because the market rents are much higher, and so they're able to support those units. I think today, and certainly in the near term, I think that we're going to start to see developers doing some mixed income. I know Deborah, I think, has done some of those already because the market rents are starting to really creep up and become more viable. We've partnered on many projects with nonprofits. In South Florida, we've partnered mostly with church-based community development corporations, CDCs. Of these CDCs, one used our mentoring and their profits to go out and develop their own project. Most have not developed the organization and sophistication to be an independent source of development. Florida Housing has been working steadily with nonprofits, particularly through the pre-development loan program, to continue to assist nonprofits to develop organizational capacity. Today, Gatehouse, we've slowed down, and I am now focusing really in two main areas. The first is the portion of our portfolio that it has 15-year-plus properties that we've developed 15 years ago that are now entering into the 15 to 30-year time frame. And we're struggling with what to do with well-maintained properties that don't need major rehab, but might need roofs or might need new, freshened up kitchens and baths and things like that. These kinds of developments require much less resources, and some maybe no resources, additional resources from Florida Housing. From our perspective, we don't want to sell them. We want to keep them in our hands, and I think it's better that that happen instead of them being sold, re-syndicated with a big injection of new funds. 41% of Florida Housing's portfolio is in exactly that position. Now, some are not well maintained, but many, many, many are well maintained because of the compliance aspects of it. The second main area of focus is we're advising and helping a nonprofit organization of parents of adult children with autism and related diseases, special needs. Please strike that last phrase. And we're looking to try to help them to develop one or more sustainable housing communities, campuses really, for their children. The organization's name is Casa Familia. They're a 501c3, new. They want to create an environment where their adult children can live in dignity, in a safe, in a nurturing environment, sort of a place where you and I could leave our children with special needs for the rest of their lives after we've gone. It's very compelling. We believe in regards to that size matters in that, and that an innovative mid-size, maybe 50 units in a development, can really provide growth opportunities for individuals which a smaller project cannot. Florida Housing has been highly supportive of these efforts, and Casa Familia just last week was approved for pre-development loan funds by Florida Housing. We're very appreciative of that. Nancy Muller spoke at a conference that we sponsored in July, which was truly inspirational for the more than 80, mostly parents, who attended, many of whom are on our board of directors. John Gill at Quest, Betsy Farmer, and Jeff Kosick, each of whom has successfully developed a project for developmentally disabled adults. Each of them came to our conference and spoke. When you think of the fact that we're all competitors, and so Casa Familia, if we get going, we're going to compete for the same funds. These really mission-based organizations were very caring, loving, supportive, and have offered to continuously help so that we can all together try to wrap our arms around what is really the most difficult housing type, I think, for Florida Housing to develop. The need in Florida is extreme. According to Florida Housing study, more than 107,000 low-income individuals with disabilities lack decent, safe housing. We need to do more. To conclude, we've come a long way since Club Goldenrod days in the early 90s, and while the polls at Club Goldenrod have long since fallen, Oasis Club of Florida Housing Development still stands. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Hi, good morning. Yeah.
Just a real quick question, maybe a question of the chair. I apologize, I was not at the first meeting, but back to your comment about housing for individuals with disabilities. I know a couple years ago we made the change in the policy to allow for this type of housing. I'd be curious to know other examples of successful programs like this. I think I know of ARC and a couple others, but maybe not right now, but at some point I think that would be a good discussion, because you're right, there are 107,000, 170. I think there's probably more than that, yeah. Especially if we became real champions of it. A lot of these individuals aren't even, quote, counted because they just stay home within the family unit. So not necessarily a question, but maybe more of a comment going forward.
I think that what we found at the conference that we sponsored is that there's not a one-size-fits-all. A lot of housing for folks with disabilities are in small group homes, which are very positive, many of which are wonderful. And even the developments that Florida Housing has funded, each of them are really different and focus on different groups. Some focus on higher functioning, some have a broader spectrum. So I can say that we're just learning and trying to get examples. There are great examples elsewhere in the country, and so we're trying to learn from other people and try to get the technology down here in Florida.
Sure, and Senator, we'll be happy to get you further information, and actually for the entire group, on some of the successful projects that Florida Housing has been involved in this area. Ms. Kaler, thank you for joining us. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Deborah Kaler, president of Sage Partners. We are an affordable housing developer based in Tampa, Florida. And I didn't realize till Mark just spoke that I've been doing this for 25 years, so I guess I met you the first year I was doing this.
I think you may have been doing this for 26 years, just technically.
26. Oh, now we're getting really technical. But anyway, I will just tell you that I appreciate what this work group is trying to tackle. I served on the Affordable Housing Study Commission for 8 years, and every year we take one of your topics, and it take a year to figure it out. So the fact you're doing this in 4 meetings is very impressive, and I want to commend you for doing that and appreciate what you're doing. So with the 25 years or whatever, 26 years of experience, with over 10,000 units of affordable housing, I will tell you we've basically run the gamut as far as development types and who we serve. But I looked at some percentages because I really, I haven't really looked at statistics and saying, well, what percentage was new construction, what percentage was acquisition rehab? Well, over that period of time, we had a new construction of about 90% and 10% acquisition rehab. But I will tell you, in the last 8 years of my focus, it's 50% acquisition rehab, and the rest, or 75% acquisition rehab and 25% new construction. So we really have focus now on the preservation side. And I think, as Nancy pointed out for you on the funding, you'll see there's a big difference on how much equity goes into a preservation versus new construction. And I also think it's ability of the funding side. We've done bonds with 4%, and then obviously had to fill in the gap with sale, home, ship. We will, if we can get the golden money, which is the 9% housing credits, obviously those are standalone deals. And our past 8 years, about 50% have been standalone housing credits, and then the others have been bonds with another subsidy. So I think you'll see, as you'll hear today, that the challenge is always making the numbers work and filling in the gaps and the competitive nature. Another point that Nancy asked me to talk about was on the market rate side. So for a period of time, I was out of affordable housing. I had actually non-compete, and so what was I going to do? Affordable housing is my passion. Well, I still love market rate, multifamily, so we did market rate housing and did over 800 units of market rate housing, learned a lot about what we go through in affordable, and it really was a great comparison to say, what do we do for market rate housing, which is really, we can put a deal together in probably 4 months, 5 months, versus what we go through on affordable housing and the barriers to entry. And we can talk about those as we have our discussion later. But I think that the main thing to think about is obviously affordable housing is the need. That's where really I've always had my passion. And as Mark has talked about, what are things that we can do today? And the populations that we serve also in some of our communities, homeless, youth aging out of foster care. And my focus lately has been senior. I call them 62 and better, and they love when I say that. And so now at each one of our senior communities, we have 3 of these. The sizes run from 188 units to 200. So I have grandparents in each apartment home. And 2 weeks ago, of course, we were looking to be the bullseye for Hurricane Irma. And the main thing I was worried about was all my grandparents. So I have one who's 95 years old, and he said, I'm not leaving. I said, but, you're on the river and it's an evacuation zone. He goes, I've been here for 22 years. I said, well, then I'm just going to have to check on you every day. The good news is that that building stood up very, very well, and I know Hannah can talk about her buildings. that she built under the code. But I will tell you that we can now report to you that all of our, and we only had a 2 at the time, Hurricane 2 category, but all of them stood up very well to the hurricane force winds, and all of our seniors were safe. And the couple topics that hopefully we'll talk about today, I think Sadowski funding. I'm very interested in healthy aging in place and the programs that we can implement in these senior communities. Workforce housing, I think there's a huge gap that we have. We serve up to 60% under these programs, but there's 60 to, I say, 120% of people that are still rent burdened. So I think those are other topics that you can talk about. And thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. And now, Ms. Murphy.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to the panel. I have been in the affordable housing industry for 29 years. I have recently retired and am enjoying it immensely. But I am proud of what I've done in those 29 years. I was Senior Vice President for Royal American Development, which is based out of Panama City, Florida. And I've been involved in virtually every aspect from soup to nuts as it relates to developing affordable housing, from land acquisition to application submittal to negotiations with on loans and investors and closing and monitoring construction, overseeing initial lease up, stabilized occupancy, and then managing it afterwards. So I do have a lot of involvement in knowledge in how the development process works. I've been involved in new construction, mixed income developments, preservation. I've was involved in about 13 preservation developments, not just in Florida, but some in Georgia, and family, elderly, and persons with developmental disabilities. I was Royal American, was the co-developer for Promise and for the villages at Noah's Landing. So personally, I'm very proud of that. In fact, since my retirement, I have become more involved with Promise and in trying to get them over the finish line and hopefully make that a successful development. My financing experience is I ran the full gamut to 9% housing credits, 4% housing credits and bonds. We've done sale, SHIP funding, new issue bond program, home, conventional, and then the old TCAP, TSEP days. I've been developing in Florida, Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina, and Texas. Not only am I a multifamily housing developer, or was, I developed subdivisions. I was involved in the development of Piney Z Plantation, which is a large development in Tallahassee, Florida, about 730 units. Was involved after the Eagle episode. We stepped in and helped out, so I don't want to have that negative impact. And I've built homes, and I've built condominiums. So I do have a wide range of development experience. My last market rate development was probably about 15 years ago when the economy was a little bit more in tune to market rate, in my opinion. Then we had the downfall, and we were also doing condominiums at the time, and we backed off. But market rate developments, I know we'll get into this later, is a different animal than it is for the 9% low-income housing tax credit or any of Florida Housing's programs. And what makes it uniquely different is that you have equity and investors that have to pay out a lot of equity to get the deal going. You don't get the 100% financing as you get from Florida Housing. It's more of a 75-25. You have 25% in equity, so you don't see that many deals. And when you do those deals, they're in very strong markets with very strong leasing efforts, and their occupancy is very high. My special needs and supportive housing, I talked about, Promise and the villages at Noah's Landing. I'm very proud of those. I think that in working with those, what I found was that they're more tailored or designed for the residents. You really have to analyze each resident and ensure that they're being provided that safe housing that they need. They need the supportive services. They need the community interaction. They need their family involvement. Training opportunities for employment, the pride in these young people when they're learning how to work in a bakery or work in a restaurant is just so heartwarming to me, and I feel really good about being a part of that. I think there needs to be a lot of social interaction activities, and I believe it takes a village to build one of these developments. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Members, at the back of tab 2, we kind of have, Nancy has written up some discussion items. I call it the question cheat sheet, as it were. And I'll take a first shot at the first question for the panel that we have here. I really want to ask you all about, in your experience, we have a lot of process, and we have a lot of different issues go into affordable housing. Can you each talk a little bit about what you see as the greatest barriers to actually producing affordable housing in Florida? I guess we'll start with Stephanie.
So that's a big question.
Yeah, it is. It is a very big question.
Yeah.
And if you can just, kind of.
So I think maybe I'll just talk about the not-for-profit perspective, and I'm sure these guys will talk about the other perspective. I think from the not-for-profit perspective, the last couple of years, Florida Housing has really done a great job to really put some incentives inside some of the RFAs to really make sure that not-for-profits have kind of an equal playing field coming in, whereas in the past that was challenging. I think to broaden that a little bit, to really broaden that into some of the other rounds that are not just the special needs rounds would make it easier for not-for-profits to compete in some of the straight affordable rounds or some of the other rounds that typically not-for-profits stay out of because the competition is just so tough that to put the limited resources that we have into a deal that the likelihood of it being funded is so slim that it typically just leaves us out of those rounds. So great effort has been made in the last few years in those special needs rounds to make them really more not-for-profit focused. The narratives, the focus on things like barriers for occupants to move in, those kind of questions, we'd love to see those added to some of the other rounds. A lot of the challenges that we have in South Florida where the rental market is so tough, the affordable housing developers really have a lot of folks to choose from. So there's a lot of additional barriers put into the application processes like background checks and double deposits or credit scores, things that not-for-profits typically don't do a lot of that really break down barriers for the very low income or the folks with special needs. So maybe incorporating some of those items into some of the other application cycles. And that would have an impact in not-for-profits being able to compete, but in also opening the doors for more folks that are really in need to be moving into those units.
Great, thank you.
The biggest barrier is there's not enough money available. The problem, I can't say exactly what it is throughout the state, but I can certainly say that in South Florida, the other problem is that land has gotten just absurdly expensive. For land that, years ago you would have said, scratch your head and said, no one wants this piece of land. The prices are just going up and up and up. And it's hard to tell whether that was a result of Florida Housing targeting specific areas. We have to be close to public transportation, you have to be close to a pharmacy, you have to be close to and there's only certain sites that really fit that. Frankly, I was involved in a lot of that rulemaking. Those criteria all make sense. I mean, the projects that we've developed using those proximity things, they're really well located. So I'm not saying that that's a problem, but what's happened is that land prices have gone up. Whether it's a result of that or it's just the general market, it's hard to say. I think that the shift to targeted, numerous RFPs or RFAs it was a great move by Florida Housing. Part of the thing that I looked at that is really different in Florida than it is, let's say, in Massachusetts is, in Massachusetts, the state agency really can pick the best project. There isn't a lot of this, sunshine stuff and all that thing, that really impacts, makes it black and white. Either, you tick a box and you win, or you, in Massachusetts, they're able to really drill deep into projects and really fund the best ones. And that's what I believe. I think the RFPs go a long way towards that, because you're already then discriminating. You're saying, we want this specific type of project, and it needs to look like this. The shift to narratives, when I was actively developing, I would have lobbied against it, but now that I'm sort of moving into nonprofit, I think that's a great idea, because a narrative is the only way that you can use to really get a better sense of what's what and what's important. So I think that's very positive.
Thank you. Real quick on that, I know that I can tell you that at Florida Housing, that's something that we struggle with is, the criteria for RFAs, and I think those are some of the most important policy documents that come out of the corporation. I know that one of the concerns that we have is too narrowly drafted RFAs we believe contribute to exactly the problem that you state, is that causes demand for certain numbers of vacant land or whatnot to skyrocket, because everybody's able to see which kind of land is going to be eligible. And so that's one of the things we struggle with, and we got to get our arms around, because I know a lot of folks say, well, we need more affordable housing in this city. But when we start to look at that, and if we narrowly focus that we're going to have a development in this specific city, it does exactly what you're talking about. It makes it become unaffordable housing. So it's one of the things that I know that we struggle with. I appreciate your comments.
Well, I have to echo all the comments that Mark and Stephanie said. Obviously, rising cost is probably our biggest challenge in filling that gap, which is where I'll get on my soapbox about Sadowski and funding 100% of what was a dedicated revenue source. So I know I'm preaching to the choir there, but that's really what is going to plug these gaps. With our focus being on preservation, and when we first started doing this, I'll just give you some numbers. We were buying high-rises for senior Section 8 high-rises at about $25,000 to $35,000 a unit. Now those prices are double. So, and then we would put in about $50,000 a unit rehab that would put it, basically at a market rate level for all amenities as well as the units themselves. And so when you add all these numbers up, it makes it more difficult. Bond funding was the way that we could make those numbers work. I think the other part is the certainty or uncertainty of how much money do you put up for each deal, and then are you going to get that money back in the returns, and the length of time. Most of the owners now of these products are saying, I can get a market rate buyer, and they don't have to go through all the hoops, and they can close in 90 days, and we need at least 6 to 8 months to close. So those are the challenges. Therefore, we pay more money, we put up harder deposits, and we do more risk. So that's where, on the 9%, I think I want to commend Florida Housing for doing the local area of opportunity funding. I have to disclose that I do chair the Housing Finance Authority, and we do pick for Hillsborough County, and obviously I don't compete in that, but that has then let the local government pick the units or the apartment community that they feel most meets their needs. And it was successful, I think, last year. I know there's some debate on whether that will work in the future, but I do feel that that is a way that the local governments have a say at the table. And then you as a developer know you've got a pretty good shot if you have the support there and you have made your application, hopefully, and done all the right things, that you would win. So that gives a little more certainty, and I think it gives the local government their say.
Thank you, Deborah.
I kind of have a different take on that. I do agree with most of what everyone has said so far. And I guess I have a different take because I'm not involved in the large counties. I tend to, when I was involved in medium and small counties. And the greatest barriers that I found were with the local municipalities themselves. Larger counties understand, they're more progressive, they understand the need for affordable housing. When you have the smaller counties, which there are quite a, medium, small counties, which there are quite a few, are somewhat behind the times. Trying to find adequately zoned land is very difficult. And then if you find a great parcel that meets all the criteria of Florida Housing's RFAs, then you have to get it rezoned. And municipalities don't want that to happen because they have negative views on affordable housing in these areas, which seems strange coming, to Orlando, but, open your mind. In the Panhandle, that's predominant. We saw that on cycle in Escambia County last cycle, where they wouldn't fund the government contributions because they weren't prepared and they didn't want to have affordable housing. Then when they think of affordable housing, they think of decreased property values, crime, increased crime, impact on schools and roads. They come out of the woodwork with excuses for it not to be in their neighborhood. And with social media, they organize better, and word gets around and they come out in droves. I attended a rezoning in a small town in Texas. This was when the impact disparity ruling came in, and we had to be in certain locations. There were 150 homeowners that showed up in the neighborhood, white T-shirts, no rezoning, big circle with an X on it. I mean, they were very intimidating, and of course we didn't get rezoned. But then again, bring it back to Florida. I hate to say it, but Panama City, Florida is a prime example. Panama City, we had a wonderful site that needed to be revitalized in downtown, and we wanted to do an elderly development there. And they said no. First, they wouldn't give us a government contribution, and then they wouldn't rezone it. And they wouldn't rezone it. There was no reason for them not to rezone it, but they did it because they didn't want affordable housing in their community. If some of the laws that were in place gave developers, more teeth, more of a legal advantage to challenge these. But right now, what I understood was that, communities that receive SHIP funding, they just have to provide affordable housing. They have a choice. They have single family or they have multifamily, or so they do in the Panhandle. So they choose single family, and they ignore multifamily. Well, not everyone can be a homeowner. You have to have some that rent. And so, to me, overcoming the opposition in the local municipalities and then trying to overcome the negative impact of NIMBYism in the communities through more, I guess, efforts is difficult.
Can I just ask a question on that?
Sure.
So when you look here, and it was always a challenge for me, that especially with SHIP, there was a minimum that everybody got, every
county gets
a minimum, right? So if you look at sale, Escambia County, $2.8 million, right? And so with the SHIP number, do you think it would be better if we look at SHIP and sale in a more targeted approach, targeting counties that have a growth management policy that is open to affordable housing? I don't want to reward bad behavior. If there's a county that is not embracing our view of affordable housing, should we just automatically, because we fund SHIP and sale 1 year, here's your percentage of the pie? Does that make sense? I mean, could you target the big counties that understand the problem, they're tying their growth management ordinances to affordable housing, and we incentivize that as opposed to just everybody gets cut a minimum check?
Right, I think that everyone deserves housing in all the counties, and I think that would be rewarding bad behavior if you excluded those areas. And they're not just counties. Bay County as a whole gives SHIP funding, but it's the municipalities within the county. So it's more involved than just the counties.
And I also want to point out that it's not only small, medium counties that have the issue with zoning and NIMBY. It can happen in any community. But I really, it's one of the things at last meeting I was starting to think about. How can we use SHIP as a reward system instead of just a de facto block grant, basically?
Well, a couple of years ago, we actually allowed, and correct me if I'm wrong, cities and counties could start pooling their SHIP funding into a bucket that would allow them some flexibility. But that was always a challenge to me, that if you're going to fund SHIP, it just, everybody got their piece. I would rather have a county come in and say, we've changed our ordinances, here is a development that we believe provides for what we want in the locations, taking in consideration busing and other things for special needs, and the housing staff and others to have the flexibility to move on that, and not just say, well, we've already distributed the funds. That would be intriguing to me, is the flexibility to move on something that's incredible for our communities.
I mean, Senator, I think your only real option is to adopt a program similar, several states have it, where if there's a community that has less than 10% affordable housing stock, defined however you want to define it, then if the local government denies zoning, it can be appealed to a separate committee, and generally speaking, that permit's going to it will override local zoning. And what that does is it basically encourages, certainly, communities to work with developers, perhaps to scale back. Instead of the developer doing the 200 unit, they'll do 150 units and work with it, because that community knows that housing is going to get built for sure. And that kind of but that's a state statute, and that would have to be moved forward. But other than that, I'm not sure there's any way to compel communities to do the right thing.
And I think Senator Rich had a question, and then we'll go to Hannah.
I actually had a comment first to what you just said, because unfortunately, it's not just small counties, it is large counties. I come from a large county with many cities, 31 cities, and a lot of the cities have serious problems. We have some that are really coming around. It's an education process. You're looking, I know Carrefour is looking at something in Wilton Manors. Right. I mean, there are cities that are beginning to come around because of several things. One is economic development. It's the issue of the economy is doing well, but people have no place to live. And so your business community is extremely involved now, where it really wasn't before. And they understand and, are supportive of the need for additional housing, and it has to be in the cities. We have almost no unincorporated area in Broward County right now. Everything was, I was in the legislature for 12 years. We moved everything into cities. That's the way people wanted to go. So now, we have the issues with the cities. And you'll hear from actually Barbara Blake Boyd this afternoon, who is head of our planning council in Broward. And we made some good beginnings for change. Some incentives. I'm not happy with some of them, like buyouts, because, it's that's putting it in somebody else's yard. But I think, it's a whole education process, and we're beginning to see a turnaround with a number of the cities that weren't really interested in doing this before, and now realize, that they're going to have to, or they're not going to have any place for their employees and their corporations and their companies to have, housing for their people. And I personally would be not supportive of tying the sale or SHIP to the changes that the counties make. I mean, we have, by any standard, the most cost burden of the 67 counties, the largest differential between low wages and high cost of housing. And I mean, you're going to make people suffer because, unfortunately, the municipalities haven't gotten there yet. Some of them, I would not, be supportive of that.
If I may add one comment to what Mark said about analyzing the housing stock, not only should you analyze it, but you should break it down into family and elderly, because in my circumstance, they had adequate housing stock as you look at it as a whole. But it was the elderly housing stock that I was proposing, and there was only one community that was in the entire municipality. Yes, it was yours. Yes, it was. Thank you.
Hannah?
Boy, I kind of lost my train. But a couple of things. One is, the minimum of SHIP is $350,000 in these counties. That's just not a lot of money. So it ends up in some municipalities or counties, putting my local government hat on, how do you divvy up that money? So it may not even be about the rental housing itself, but just how do we want to prioritize that little pot of money? I think it gets really challenging to do that kind of overlay that Mark is talking about, because that just elongates our process. I mean, I went through a NIMBY battle in an unnamed municipality, at which we knew we were going to win because we could appeal it to the state. But it became a timing issue with our funding and other sources that, yes, we can do these overlays, but time is money, and time is, if we lose our funding source, we haven't won. So that becomes an issue as well. The other challenge that I see with the SHIP program is, at most, the county or municipality can put 25% of the money towards rental, because that's just how the statute is. So that really limits the amount of money that actually can go into rental housing, because it really is meant to be a home ownership program as opposed to a rental housing program. So that ends up with our limitations. We were able to, I saw actually, Nancy, you put my project in there. But we were able to use a large chunk of SHIP money to fund a rental housing program in Pasco County, because George Romanoli had a lot of program income, and so that was much more flexible. So we could use a large chunk of SHIP to do our rental housing, but only because of the way George had structured these, and it was a larger-ish medium county that had a lot of program income in it. But otherwise, it's very challenging with the SHIP funds to use those for rental. So,
Other questions for the panel? Julie?
Hey, this is a little bit of a change in subject, but while I have the expertise at the table, I'd love to ask the question. Hannah, I think you may be able to provide some insight on this as well. At the last meeting, we heard from the city administrator of Marathon regarding some of their affordable housing issues, and since that meeting, Hurricane Irma has hit, and there's significant need for, as we're understanding that there were significant impacts to their affordable housing stock that existed in those communities. As we're thinking about potential opportunities for funding that may be coming down from, that follow, there's often funding that comes after disaster to follow things like that. And we're thinking about, what kinds of programs that are already in place that you all kind of take advantage of, what programs would really help to rebuild the affordable housing stock in those communities in a way that would be fast and efficient and address that in a manner quickly.
Well, so Julie, there are some federal funds that are going to come down, and I live in St. Johns County, and it's a small county that just became CDBG eligible independently, but is going through the state DEO process for the CDBG disaster recovery, CDBG-DR, for the last storm. And they don't have the capacity. They need a lot of technical assistance to understand the rules, the regulations. How do you set up processes? I mean, all of a sudden, they're going to have this money that they have to replace all the homes that were lost from Matthew, and now we have Irma. And, they're not Jacksonville. They're not a large community that already had a robust housing development component to their local government staffing, expertise, and that kind of thing. So I think I think one of the things that collectively we need to maybe help figure out for the smaller communities when these disasters hit and resources suddenly become available. But if you've never done this, you've never done this. And sure. How do you do this? And they're reaching out to people, and, they're doing a very good job. But, it's kind of like wonderful these resources are coming, desperately needed. An awful lot of housing was lost last time. But, oh my gosh, we've got to do things really quickly. How do we make this happen? And so that's one of my observations in meeting with county staff and just trying to hook them up with people I know who know federal programs better and that kind of stuff. That's one of the challenges. So if you don't do this, and all of a sudden you have to do this and you need to do it well, it's hard, that learning curve is a real steep climb.
And I just know from the past, looking at the past hurricanes, that the state has been able to allocate and direct resources to those damaged areas and combine them with CDBG. And then under the Sadowski, there's a Catalyst program that will also be there to do capacity building. The real key is timing and getting those resources out as quickly as possible to stabilize those communities that had the damage of the hurricanes.
Yeah, I mean, we have a blueprint from the 04-05 hurricanes that is really good. I mean, I was looking at it after Irma hit, because I went down to the Keys and checked our properties, which did really well, really well. So it's a testament to these new building codes. We literally had a minor leak in one property. And we own 3 of them in the Keys. And I was talking to somebody else who has built property at mile marker 73 or 74, and his property did great, even with storm surge. We had storm surge on one of our properties, but it was above. But, so there is a blueprint out there that I think we need to dust off and use right now and start allocating resources, you know, using that blueprint going forward. I think the Catalyst program, absolutely, we need to be funding that for technical assistance. I will speak for the Keys. I think there is actually a lot of expertise in the Keys right now. There really is. They've done a good job down there, but they're gonna need staffing to get these programs out. There's gonna be a lot of need out there. We haven't touched on that. I'm very worried about construction pricing right now. It's gonna be painful, like I am chewing my fingernails, painful in the next year.
Houston's already seeing massive
Yeah,
increases.
and I'm worried. I have a project that's under construction right now in Miami-Dade. We're 95% bought out, which means our contracts are signed on this, but I'm worried about labor.
Right.
And, you know, getting our guys out there and what this is gonna mean on timing for us. So this is gonna be a real concern going forward, just in terms of what our pricing is gonna look like. But I do think there is a good network. We've had SHIP funding for the last couple of years. Luckily, this wasn't the years a couple of years ago where SHIP funding dried out. So we do have a good network out there of local government people who know how to distribute this money. And who have got good relationships with contractors over the last couple of years. So I think there is the skill set. I just think we're gonna need to get money out there. The Keys, I went down there last week. Again, our properties did great, but it is really, you know, as I got farther south, because we have a property in Islamorada, it was really challenging. What's going on down there right now is just really challenging, so.
Yes. Yes, Senator?
I think one other thing besides construction is rental. I mean, we had very little rental property as it is for people to be able to afford. And now there are quite a number of people from the Keys moving north to Dade and Miami-Dade and Broward and maybe other places as well. But it's going to have a significant impact on our ability to be able to provide those rental properties for people, you know, people that are homeless, people that need affordable housing, so forth. So it's another thing to add, I guess, to the pot.
Senator, may I ask you a question? So in Broward, as an example, has Broward County taken stock of what land it owns?
Yes.
And tried to go ahead and push that out and get that developed, so forth?
Yes, but as I said, we own, there's a very small, tiny percentage, I think, I forget what the percentage, it's in the low single digits of what the county owns. And then if they own something in a municipality, you have the same issue of having to go through the permitting process and, you know, all the issues that we're trying to go to. And this Broward Next, which is our housing plan that was just approved, you know, has some movement forward, as I said, but we don't have a lot of land, and some of that land is in municipalities that we'd have to deal with.
Because in all of the development that we've done in Florida, and we've done a real lot, we were only able to do one project in Broward. Even though we looked and looked and looked, it's just so, it was so difficult to find land and
Right.
zoned land and so forth.
You know, it was interesting because during the, right during the recession, there were some really wonderful projects that were able to be built because the land prices, people needed to sell the land and whatever, everything has a silver lining, I guess. But, but that's not available now, and that's the way it is,
Kind of going off of, the discussion that we're having, I wanted to ask you all if, and I know Kim kind of touched on it, but, can you talk a little bit about your experiences working with local governments on the permitting and land use issues for developing affordable housing, and for those of you who have versus market rate? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think it varies throughout the state. We, frankly, and I hope this is a safe thing to say.
We are being live streamed, just so you know.
I think that we found that Miami is a more difficult place to get through the permitting process in a short period of time. It takes longer. That's just a fact. The way the process is a sequential process rather than being, having plans run through each department, through all departments at the same time. So that's a challenge. Other areas of the state, we really haven't found permitting issues at all, slow-ups, so forth. And we have found also that if it takes, let's say, an extra 6 months, that we've been able to extend our timeframes with Florida Housing. It's been very understanding, so we really haven't had that much of a problem. We've not developed, as I said, any market rate here in Florida, so I don't know that is a distinction, although in Dade County, it is, you'll get an affordable project processed faster because it has an expedited status, and there's actually someone who the city has designated to help shepherd the project through the departments a little more quickly. So I would say that affordable gets permitted faster in Dade than market rate.
Deborah?
And I just want to give kudos because all this expedited permitting came through SHIP. When SHIP, you have basically a local housing assistance plan, and they require every municipality to say, we do expedited permitting. So everyone should have it, but what we found is a lot of people don't really, in the permitting department, did not know, and especially in your smaller communities. So we would educate them, get out the documents and say, no, you have to have expedited permitting for affordable housing. So the other thing is now SwiftMud, which is also a bear to get through, is under that. So getting them to acknowledge it is somewhat of a challenge, but we have seen that now affordable housing will go quicker. It's all a matter of how stacked up they are as far as the activity. Market rate, I think, will basically lag behind, again, because of the expedited permitting, as long as they are recognizing that you are an affordable housing community. So we do see that you can get through the permitting process as long as they recognize that.
Trey, can I ask you a question to follow up on that?
Go ahead.
So our charge is really to develop recommendations for the legislature and the governor on what Florida can do as a state to help make more affordable housing possible. And you guys have done market and affordable, and time is money. We've heard about 4 times just this morning alone. And affordable just takes a lot longer to get the shovel in the ground. Are there any recommendations that you guys have as to things we could, consider in our recommendations on ways to shorten that time lag of just getting the shovel in the ground? I think that's one of the bigger differences between affordable and market.
Well, I'll say that the fact that I will not start working on plans until after I have secured a commitment from Florida Housing for tax credits, you've lost 6 months right there. I don't know a better way to do that unless we as developers have some certainty from you all that we're going to be funded. And so we lose a lot of time. And I don't know any other way.
And specifically, that would be when you're invited to credit underwriting.
Correct.
Yeah.
So when we're invited to credit underwriting, we scramble and panic, really, because we don't have much time to get through credit underwriting. I'm not advocating you change your rule. I think your rule keeps us focused, and we're really focused at that point. But, yeah, we've lost a lot of time.
Other questions or comments? I'm sorry, Ken?
I'd just like to add that I think maybe the one thing that might help speed up the process, which would require a somewhat of a change in Florida housing, would be to simultaneously underwrite the deal before it's awarded. A lot of the other states, such as Texas and Georgia, do that very thing. So once you get the award, you've already got a set of plans that have been approved. You've got your appraisal and your market study, and a lot of everything is done. So you've got the bones of the design work completed, even engineering. So then you just move to final. So that does speed up the process. But then the other thought is that it delays the review process. So I don't know if there's really a happy medium there. Yeah, but I just wanted to add that.
I think on the timing side, I know part of it is the Florida Housing Board has to approve everything. And this is just a suggestion, as maybe there may be a committee that could have the approval or something that could speed up the process, because you wait every 4 to 5 weeks for the board to meet. And I know and I'm just giving you a local government side of this, which is from our Housing Finance Authority, because we know time is money, and to get these deals in the ground, that we will have special meetings or, so I'm just thinking as far as that is another cog in the wheel, because the Administrative Procedures Act, I'd love to say just get rid of that, and then we don't have all these appeals, but I know that's not going to happen. So how can, given that we're going to go through appeals and all the other things that have to get to that final invitation to credit underwriting, maybe there's a way to have a committee that would meet, or telephonic. I'm just trying to think of a way that we could save at least 2 to 3 weeks off to get, again, the shovel in the ground quicker.
I was going to suggest that maybe some additional consistency between the underwriters during the underwriting process. And again, like Mark said, the underwriting process is critical. I'm not suggesting that it should be less rigorous, but just some uniformity between the different underwriters, especially I think with supportive housing deals. There's been some requirements imposed, as Shannon shakes her head, along the way on some supportive housing deals by some underwriters and not others, that have made it more challenging and taken up some time in getting a deal to the finish line. And maybe knowing those things beforehand. So if we knew that was a requirement in the beginning, maybe we would have tried to do something differently. But just some more consistency, not less rigorous, but just some consistency and knowledge of all of the items going into a specific deal.
I think that's actually a great point, Stephanie. I remember we had always been with one underwriter for years, and so a lot of the developer experience and all the bona fides and so forth, they had and they knew. We just had to refresh it. We then changed at one point, and I'm sure we lost 2 or 3 weeks just getting that underwriter sort of up to speed and who we were and so forth. And I think it's really unnecessary. So I wonder whether we could, more consistency and who gets assigned and so forth might be helpful, particularly for particular types of deals.
Okay.
Can I put my developer hat on for a second? So with my developer hat on, the challenge right now with Kim's suggestion is that I have done applications in other states, and there's more surety there, and my company does. So being willing to put more money up front in terms of market studies and appraisals and that kind of stuff, when you know there's much more surety in getting awarded, makes sense. But again, we've got the administrative hearings. I mean, I just don't know a way to get around that with what we've got going on in Florida. So I'm very challenged right now to suggest that we do things that make an application much more expensive when we've just got no surety that we're going to get awarded. That's just a challenge. And, you know, Mark's right. I mean, we can't go into architectural is hundreds of thousands of dollars. So unless we know that that's going to happen and that we can get funded, as a developer, I just can't put up that much money for a project, then I hand back to the landowner because I haven't gotten the funding on it. So those things do just add time, and I don't know, given what we have to work under, the appeals just, they are allowed to happen. I don't know how we get to a point in this state where we are in other states, and make that make more sense right now, so.
I agree. Mark, do you have?
Thank you, Trey. I had a question on special needs housing, or two, actually. And one is just from my personal understanding. Are special needs developments typically rental, or is it a mix? Or I assumed it would be, but I just wanted to be sure I understood.
Correct.
Usually rental?
Rental.
And the other is, I know, Mark, you were talking about one size doesn't really fit all, but, and trying to come up with recommendations, are there any things that kind of cross-cut amongst special needs development in terms of the financing or whatever the issue may be that we might consider as a panel that might be put forward for special needs housing and for many of the panelists? Thank you.
Well, I know that there has been a lot of discussion at Florida Housing on the question of size. You know, is 100 units in a special needs community too much? I think the consensus is yes. Is 50 too much? You know, I think that kind of a conversation, we should have that, because I think it's very, very important. My own view, which I've already expressed once, but I figured I'll hit it twice while I have everyone captive, is that you know, 50 units can allow you to have amenities, things like a swimming pool, for example, which folks with autism love to swim. It's just, I can't explain it, but that's a fact. So. You know, we need to consider this, I think, in a very holistic kind of a way. Most of these developments have no mortgage, no first mortgage. And so they rely entirely on subsidy. The individuals usually qualify for tax credit, you know, for tax credit rents. They get funded by Medicaid waivers and so forth. And so it's a complex series of things, but the upshot is government's got to pay one way or another through tax credits or otherwise for the entire development cost of the project.
Just want to add that, so our experience is that you could go a little bit bigger than 50 if you mix the populations. We have several communities that are in the 80 to 100 unit range that are half supportive housing for special needs population, half 60% AMI, traditional affordable housing, and it works well. And it takes a little bit, you know, it takes a sophisticated manager and good supportive services to support the special needs populations, but it works.
If I could ask also, do you all generally manage your properties for the life of the properties, or how does that typically work?
We manage our own properties.
We do too.
And Mark, so that you know, I chair the State Supportive Housing Coalition, and there really is no one-size-fits-all, and that's why I think how Florida Housing has amended its processes, the narratives and things that people were talking about. They do a deeper dive on the projects for special needs to really understand what is the vision that this person is proposing, and do they understand best practices? Are they implementing, you know, because there are good practices and there are not good practices, and through this RFA process, and Jack can, you know, weigh in as well. At least now, you know, they have staff that are informed of best practices, and if they don't understand, they go out to experts and learn, you know, has this worked somewhere else, and that kind of thing. We've done multiple projects, you know, some that are 100% special needs, some that are a mix, and, you know, we have found 100 units to be fine if it's mixed. We have one that's 43 units, that's high, the pilot that's actually in that book. That's a 43 unit where we're targeting, you know, the hardest to serve in our community. We turned away people who weren't assessing hard enough, and it's very successful. The neighborhood is very thrilled with it. The residents are succeeding. So it comes down to resource. They're right, you cannot have any debt, because we're talking about people who live on Social Security, if they even get that. We have some residents with zero income. So it is a very specialized sub-market of the affordable housing arena, but as you can see from the handouts in the book, the cost savings to the community are pretty demonstrative. So it's a good thing we're investing that way.
Yes, I'd like to add that in the developmentally disabled communities that we are involved in, or my former company is involved in, they do it for outside owners. And one of the key aspects is that it's a work, live, and play kind of thing. You need to have additional employment opportunities that may be owned by that nonprofit that put back and raise funds to help the community thrive. I think that's very important.
Just want to say one other thing about size. I think, having a variety is also really important so folks can choose what works for them. We have some residents that really want to live in 100% supportive housing where the whole building is folks with their past experiences and where there's more of a sense of community during the day, more folks are around at home during the day. It's a different feel than in one of our buildings that are mixed, where you have families that are going to school during the day and more working folks, and to have a variety of options available so folks can choose the same way we would all want to choose, high rise, garden style, 100% homeless, 100, half. We also operate a bunch of scattered site programs where we just pay a leasing subsidy so folks can choose to live wherever they choose to live, and we just pay the leasing amount for them. So a healthy community would really do best with all of those options so folks can choose what works for their family.
I also wanted to just give you a little information, Mark, and for anybody else. A couple times, Shannon and maybe a couple others have referred to the way that Florida Housing takes a deeper dive or uses narratives in scoring. We get so many applications across our kind of big mainstream RFAs, the general ones, that the idea of getting narratives in and then the amount of time we'd have to spend scoring those, it would just take all of us even longer to get the affordable housing done. But for the special needs developments, we agreed some years ago that it made sense that we should spend more time because of that population potentially needs more assistance, and that we needed to be more thoughtful about choosing the developer and the developer's partners, which is something we don't think about so much with a family or elderly project, but we do think about partners when it comes to special needs deals. So we ask for written information describing the property's proximity to everything from grocery stores and healthcare to jobs to the services, or access to public transit or transportation, in some cases private transportation. We also look at management experience in a way that we don't with our kind of regular family properties. Those developers that get funding for a family property are required to use an experienced management company that meets some criteria. But in this case, we're actually looking at, do you have experience working with people with special needs with this particular population, persons with developmental disabilities, for instance. And some developers come in and they partner with a management company that has that experience, which is fine with us. The developer doesn't have to come in and have all the experience. And the final thing that it's been really important to us, and I say important to us, it's what we've learned from people like Stephanie, from Shannon, from the various folks out there who've done this work over time, is that having partners who will either provide the supportive services or where the developer knows where those places are to go is really important, and in some cases supported employment, depending on the population being served. And so some of our really successful properties, Jack, you've got one where Boley Center is the service provider, because Jack does housing, but he's got a whole nother, sort of side of Boley that he doesn't run, that's service provision. And Stephanie, your shop's like that too, but not all developers are like that. Most of our housing developers who do special needs do the housing side, and then they partner in the community. Shannon, you're kind of more that example. So understanding, like, if somebody like a Shannon comes in, do they understand that they have to partner out there that they can't just have the people in the housing and then, well, good luck, hope, So anyway, so those are the kinds of things we score on, and we are always trying to figure out what, how to do that better, but, and if we get any recommendations out of this group, that'd be great.
Thank you. That was very helpful, and I'm sure we'll have more conversation about it. The only recommendation I think I heard out of that was perhaps revisiting the number of units. So I don't know if that's something to have further conversation later.
Well, we
but
fund,
thank you for that.
so
yeah.
Florida Housing funds over, really believe in a range of housing types, and especially across special needs developments. So we fund developments, at this point, special needs developments in rural areas as low as, I think, 4 units and 10 units, 15, up to like 30 to 50. And then for some of the housing credit developments, especially where they have like mixed populations, maybe families or elders, and then people who've been formerly at that point homeless, go up to as high as about 80 now. And I think that's about as high as we've really been seeing these. So if there are recommendations on that we need to think about, love to hear them.
Great. Thank you very much.
And can I just add, Nancy, I know that another policy implementation has been for just basically your 9% housing credits, that of your extremely low income, set aside 50% will be special needs. And that one is where we will service with a memorandum of understanding with the local community for youth aging out of foster care, homeless. And I just want to give you one anecdote, because I learned, I thought youth aging out of foster care, I care about that. At the time, I had an 18-year-old and a 19-year-old, and I said, oh yeah, we can house them. What we found is, this was one of our I call it workforce housing. It's the average age is 28 in the community. It's downtown Tampa. That when we brought the 18-year-olds in who had just come straight out of foster home, that we weren't able to give them all the supportive services. So we had to go back to the service provider and make sure that they understood what it means for independent living. And subsequently, with another hat, we went to the Housing Finance Authority, and they then funded a grant to work with the local agencies to make sure when these, especially youth aging out of foster care, were put into these living environments, that they also had the social service supportive network. So I think it's something, as Florida Housing's adopting that policy, to integrate them into what I consider regular standard market rate apartment communities under affordable housing, that they look at also the services that the MOU is providing.
This doesn't have to be just for large or even middle-sized developments or projects. I mean, this can be just for individuals, because we have a particular program in Broward called Handy, where they deal with children, youth aging out of the foster care system. And if someone's placed in an apartment, which they are very often, and the county will help subsidize that they'll be an individual, but they'll have the supportive services because of the nonprofit that provides those services. So it is very important that they not be totally on their own.
Right.
Totally agree.
Just want to mention one thing there. Nancy was talking about the narratives being too cumbersome to include in other rounds, and I understand that 100%. But maybe including some aspects of some of the items that you look for that are often barriers to ELI folks moving in, like background checks, criminal background checks, credit checks, as some kind of taking that into account when scoring an application without having to go to the full-blown narrative format.
One possible recommendation might be, at this workshop that we had in July, it was quite amazing to have lots of folks who have experience all talking to each other and coming up with, our goal was to get best practices so we could figure out what we want to build. And I think that to the extent that Florida Housing can facilitate those kinds of discussions with stakeholders, all of us who are interested in this, even if it's once a year, having a full-day session where everybody just talks. And so we try to develop the technology, the best that we can. I think that could be really useful. And I think we would all really relish the opportunity to share ideas and get new ideas from other people.
Okay, further questions for the panel? I don't see any. Well, we can.
Do we want to want to go over any of these other questions
Yeah.
that were in here?
Sure. I'm sorry. I like the one where, so can you all talk a little bit about when you are proposing a new development and submitting an application to us at Florida Housing, assuming that, you know, that your goal is to get that specific project funded, what do you think about, what's important to you as you move through the process? And can you talk a little bit about that and how that could be different, a different process than the market rate? I know we've touched on that a little bit already, but.
Well, what we think about is the maximum number of applications we can possibly put together so that we can score well in the lottery. I mean, that's frankly it. We try to tie up as many pieces of land that are rational.
Could you talk about the lottery a little bit? I don't know if everybody around the table
sure.
understands that.
Sure. So now we're talking about the allocation of, let's say, 9% tax credits to just large counties, let's say, or medium or small counties. So it's sort of the general pool of funding for affordable housing. And what ends up happening, because all of your developers are experienced, everyone scores a perfect application. And in fact, you don't submit unless you can score perfectly on all counts. And the ultimate dispute resolution is a lottery. And so everybody gets a lottery ball, and you hope that you get a low lottery ball, in which case you win, and if you don't, you don't. What that fosters is the necessity, for example, in Dade, where the developers are aggressive, filing 10, 12 applications per developer is not unusual. So that's not really getting at the best deals. There have been proposals over the years that have talked about limiting the number of applications per developer. Of course, that leads to gaming the system and so forth. And so there are some problems with it. I think there probably is a way to accomplish that, whether it's maximum number of applications, maximum number of awards, something to lessen the frenzy to tie up pieces of land. It's contributing to what we talked about at the beginning, land costs going up. Because if we tie up 10 and Landmark ties up 10 and Related ties up 10 and HANA ties up 10, sites, we're bidding up land costs. So if there was a way to have, for me to take fewer shots but have them be the better deals, I think everyone's better served.
So the lottery, I want to make sure I understand. So all these applications come in from all over the state? They're not specific geographically to a location?
Right, the way that Florida Housing does it, Senator, is usually by large counties, of which there are 6, I believe, or 7. Then there are medium counties, which are, about 33 or so, and then the small counties are about 35. And so, I don't know, I'm not really good at math, but that adds up to 67. That's generally how Florida Housing does it, by how large the county is.
And then each application is a perfect application, right?
Yes.
So there's an assumption that each one of those projects in an Orange County or a Dade County is needed.
Correct.
And then you drop the lottery ball.
Yeah, and when you get a perfect score, what you've done is you've committed to creating a pretty high-quality development. It has to have community space, it has to have adequate, parking, it's got to have microwaves and all sorts of things. So it's already meeting a minimum threshold that, like Oasis Club, is still standing and still operating and so forth. So, yeah. And so there's no meaningful way to distinguish between the Orange County and the Dade application in your example. So how do you do it?
Do the counties weigh in on the application?
I think that the tendency at Florida Housing has been not to try to do too much of that, because then politics get involved, and so developers who are connected, perhaps would get the nod, or there would be pressure or something like that.
I just, and again, just not involved in the world as much as you guys are. I'm just trying to think if we really want to push the counties to be a partner in this, is a lottery really the best way to get the best deal? And could you have a situation where, I'll say Orange County, because that's where I'm from, is if you had 10 applications from Orange County, instead of throwing them in a lottery, if there was one that just stood out that clearly fit the future and the growth management plan that Orange County has, could that one rise to the top to where you wouldn't need a lottery? I guess is what I'm getting at.
And I can respond to that, Senator. I think Florida Housing 2 years ago took it as a pilot program in Jacksonville to have exactly as you described. And Jacksonville then had a local, basically, round of competition. And that one was the selected one. They had to give a maximum number of dollars. And then as long as their application was perfect, like Mark says most of them are, that would be the winner. So that was successful. Then last year, they basically, of the 7 large counties, did it for 6 of the large counties, all but Miami-Dade. And that's where I can give you some experience because I sit on the Housing Finance Authority and we were able to pick that. Now the question is, was it political? And that was the question coming back to us because the city of Tampa had an application and the county had one. And I can tell you, at least from the county side, that it absolutely was not political. We did a small, basically a mini round. We got longer affordability. We got perpetuity for the one that got submitted. We got leveraging, we got location, we got revitalization. I mean, all the things that we felt as what would be the best, basically, community to put up into the tax credit round was selected. And that one did win this year, so we're about to start another round of that. So this will be the second year in the state of Florida that this local area of opportunity where the local government does have their own, what I call mini round before it goes to the state of Florida.
I do want to, 2 points. One, some communities don't want that because they're afraid it will start becoming a political thing, and they just don't want that pressure of what do we do. I also want to remind everybody of the conversation we had at the beginning about zoning and denying affordable housing. They could be picking projects in the areas where those people should live. So there's pros and cons, and it's a struggle because I support local communities that really either have a project that's really important to downtown revitalization, or they have a specific population, or whatever it may be. They should be able to raise their hand and go, please, just fund this one, we really need this one. But sometimes it's not good actors, and they're trying to actually segregate people into other parts, and they'll pick the ones because they don't want people, a project that would be in a better school zone with better amenities for the families being permitted. So there's pros and cons on both sides. It's tough.
Yeah. Stephanie, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say that not-for-profits typically don't have the resources to get site control on 10 sites and submit 10 applications. And that's why we typically have to stay out of those rounds. Like I mentioned in the beginning, that to figure out a way to encourage not-for-profits to be able to compete in those rounds, it's very hard to compete with that. And that's why we typically have 1 or 2 deals that we're working on at a time that we're pulling along and saving them for a special needs round where we can compete. But to maybe look at, if we're looking at the lottery system, how we can, if changes are being suggested, that how we can kind of even the playing field for not-for-profits to be able to enter some of those rounds.
Trey, can I make a comment, please?
Yep, sure.
I wanted to point out Pinellas County. Pinellas County was involved in the large government area of opportunity, and there were 10 applications submitted in this last round. Even though the one deal received this contribution, local government contribution, correct me if I'm wrong, Nancy, that deal did not submit a perfect application, and it fell out. So that allowed the other 2 or 3 applications to be considered. It was a big shark-infested waters and a big fight, but one did prevail. I'd like to say that I think the answer to this is to keep the counties involved or the governments involved. I think they need to have some say in where these developments are going, but secondly, there still needs to be caps on the number of applications that can be submitted. I think Mark understated the number of applications that are submitted. We're not talking 8 to 10, we're talking 20 to 30. And when you have 20 to 30 applications submitted by 3 or 4 developers, and then all the other developers that are trying to submit what they perceive as quality applications and not quantity, that causes a lot of burden on Florida Housing because they have to review those applications. So I believe that if applications were limited, I know this was tried before and it's very difficult, but there's got to be a way to do it. You limit the number of applications that a developer can submit, and then perhaps you limit the amount of an award that is given to one particular developer. Florida Housing does have a good system now where the principal disclosures are detailed down to that one individual or 2 individuals or whatever, but you bring it down to a person and not a corporation or an LLC. It's very important, I think, that they continue that, and caps are submitted, or caps are placed on the number of deals that can be submitted and the amount of an award. Say, in Florida now, when you're in a special area where you get the boost, you could get as much as $2.5 million. So what if you had a $5 million cap for an award to any one particular developer in the large counties? And then when you go to the small counties, you just double the maximum amount for the smaller, medium counties. Other states do it, and it works well. Florida may be prohibited from doing that because of the sunshine laws and the administrative procedures, but I think that would be the best case scenario. It would ease the burden of Florida Housing to have to review all those applications, and it would give a broader range of developers to get involved in the program and build affordable housing.
Can I make a clarification?
Yeah.
If you wouldn't mind? I want to say that I think that this issue has been the toughest issue that Florida Housing has ever dealt with in the competitive funding process. It's been the toughest because you know, I've worked at Florida Housing for a number of years, and I've been really impressed with the problem solving over time. This one has we've tried solutions, and then the gamesmanship has gotten worse, so we've backed off. Some of the politics involved. I do think that, and we haven't tried it lately, and some of the ways that we are doing some of the information gathering on principals now that are, you know, the individual people who are part of a development team, which we didn't used to collect in quite the same way, might allow us to do some of that. So it might be time to try that again. But I will say, and I am, of many of my Florida Housing colleagues, I'm the least knowledgeable about this. I was not one of the people who were working on this, but this is, to me, this is one of the most critical things that we have not been able to figure out, which isn't to say that we shouldn't try again.
Could you, and I'm just thinking, how do you address it? Could you have a situation where instead of it's a developer puts in 20 ping pong balls and whatever's picked, it's just what's going to pick? Can Florida Housing Authority, can we put forward, okay, here are the zones, here are the hot, you know, areas that we know we have an issue. I'll take Orange County as an example. Affordable housing in Orange County, in northwest Orange County, may not be as important as near I-Drive in the tourism corridor. Could you have a heat map or something that says, these are the areas of Orange County that we know we need affordable housing. They're close to busing, they're close to the schools, and this, whoever brings forward the applications to address this particular issue will be given the opportunity to do it, as opposed to just 20 applications in Orange County, and you hope you get the ping pong ball. Could you do that on the front end? I mean, I just don't.
So the issue becomes, and this, I'm going to use Miami-Dade as sort of we were what was considered the whole county a difficult to develop area. So that meant you got a boost in credits. It meant you could bring more equity, more funding into the deal. It went down to, now it's called small area DDA, small area difficult to develop areas, and it reduced the number to zip codes. And so now lots of areas in the county aren't included. The problem is that just jump the land prices up, because we have to, in order to make these projects work, be in an area with this boost, because our construction costs were concrete, everything, impact windows, zoning, you know, our construction prices. So what happens is when you keep reducing the number of areas that you can buy land in, our land just gets astronomically expensive. So it's such a challenge, both for the Florida housing side and for us. Now I've got my developer hat on, not my government hat on. It's such a challenge for us on both sides to figure out how do we manage costs and also prioritize projects when we've got this administrative, I
But
keep
let
on
me-
saying review,
Let me
that
ask a
makes challenges.
question with a group of, people who've done a lot of deals, and especially in Miami where land is, obscenely crazy. I've been quasi-periphery to this because I've never really considered doing the large county RFAs, but I'm in every rural workshop for the last 10 years, and boy, have I heard some interesting things. If we're creating the value, the affordable housing industry, by saying, we want it on iDrive, and that's the only reason it's worth more money is because the funding source is saying, well, it's worth more money. You'll get $20 million, $25, $50 million if you find a site and you get your lottery ball selected. If in the process, there's a maximum amount you're allowed to put in for acquisition based upon what Florida Housing has determined is fair land value on some basis, then the developers are only going to offer so much. And we won't be creating our own feeding frenzy. Because basically, we're creating our own feeding frenzy.
I think in Miami-Dade, partly it's this DDA issue, partly it is land is scarce. Land that is zoned,
Sure,
land that is.
but if I'm more going to what the senator
Yeah.
was referring to, which is if we know there's need in certain areas, and if we target those areas and therefore create the impossibility of doing affordable housing because you're creating land values that won't permit affordable housing, if in some way in identifying the process beforehand you set, this is what the land is worth today, and we'll give you a 10% escalator for, whatever, I'm making all this up, but, and then therefore the developers can only put in so much as the acquisition cost, and the feeding frenzy stops being the feeding frenzy that is at least being created by Florida Housing, as opposed to other outside forces that are creating. I'm
So-
just trying to spitball
so-
Yeah,
something.
no,
Obviously, as a developer, that sounds unappetizing. However, I will say that I remember 5 or 6 years ago, there was a round where land on Brickell in Miami was the thing, because it was really just basically 2 blocks, and you were, 2 or 3 blocks, and you were either there or not. And when we were looking at parcels of land, we couldn't find anything on Brickell that was less than, I can't remember, 35,000 a unit or something like that. And my fear, and the reason I didn't tie up one of those pieces of land, is because I didn't think it would appraise properly. So that when Florida Housing does their appraisal and there's a land value, the excess of land cost above that value in their appraisal, I eat that cost. And so that was even more unappetizing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Mark, actually. We are capped at appraised value. So even though we may be artificially bidding it up, that's it, we're capped. We
If we're
can't.
artificially bidding it up, how is it appraising? That doesn't.
No, because we bid up a land, but it's going to appraise to the last sale, which is a market sale. It's not an affordable housing sale that we're comping against. I mean, I had this experience in the Keys where the last piece of property I bought, we ended up being about 30,000 over the appraised value, and we had to eat that. I mean, I was close enough that it just made sense to go forward, but you can't be hugely over the appraised value, so there really is a cap that, in the end. But in places like Brickell, I'm going to say where the market is hot, Orlando right now, that market price right now is so high because we're competing against these market rate developers, and then we're bidding it up ourselves, it's just, the land is crazy right now. I mean, the one thing, talking about the recession, and I do not want to go back to the recession, but boy, it was easy to find construction and it was easy to find land in those days. We're just not there right now. We're just not.
Maybe it's just me, but I am not understanding how all 10 proposals can be perfect. I mean, is there something we can do to the proposal that asks some other questions or something? It's like grade inflation in schools today. I mean, everyone can't get a perfect score. I mean, there's something wrong here. And if it is that way, I think something needs to be done to the proposals themselves to have more differentiation there. I don't know, because I haven't looked at the proposal, but I'm just throwing it out there. It just seems odd to me that everyone is perfect. And I do agree that I think there should be a cap of some kind. I think it's unfair to a nonprofit who can't do that, who just don't have the resources to do that, that they have to really be in the same pool with people that, can put in 10 proposals and play the lottery. There's something kind of not right.
And it was an evolutionary process. I remember when they went to the degree of differentiation with Florida Housing, and that's when we got into the proximity, and were you half a mile from a bus stop, and then it became, were you right beside the bus stop? And those were the differentiators. And now they've come a little bit loose on that, and that's why I think there's more perfect scores. The other, and this is going to be a hot topic, and I know the panelists are going to have some, but I believe in leveraging. The sale now, when you go for sale funds, it's based on your sale per unit. And the one who asks for the least amount of sale per unit will get scored above the person who asks for more. And leveraging is sometimes a slippery slope, because they call it the race to the bottom. Where's the quality?
Where's the quality?
Are you leaving quality on the table to basically ask for more 9% credits per unit than the other person, or less? So but I do believe there right now there's what they call an A and a B. That's where they basically at Florida Housing does have some leveraging. But I think if you raise that bar, that will distinguish. And I think it's a matter, I totally agree on limiting the applications. And I know we talked about this several years ago, and there was a lot of gaming, but I do believe with what we can get on the technology world that we can probably reduce the amount of gaming. But I think, I will just tell you from our perspective, and why I have not submitted in 3 years. And I am a small company now. I mean, I came from a large company, and we had 300 people. Now I have 4. And to do a business plan where we're basically going to risk about $100,000 to put in an application and tie up the sites and do all the things we have to do, we can't afford to do that, because, I'm in the not-for-profit world, really, and looking at the certainty. So looking at anything that we can do to distinguish, and that's where, I do like, again, the local area of opportunity. If I happen to be the one to convince the local government I'm the one, then I know my odds are much higher. And we can't afford to really play the lottery. We cannot afford to put in 10 deals. It just is impossible. So, that's why I'm kind of sitting on the sidelines, and I feel bad that we haven't submitted. But we cannot afford.
But then you might have the best application.
Yeah, and we do have a track record, and we feel like we know
Stephanie
what we're
may.
doing. But right now, with the system, we have chosen not to play the lottery.
So we're a larger developer, and we also have not put an application in a couple of years. And one of my personal decisions on really semi-retiring from development is because it just doesn't make any financial sense to. It's a pig in a poke. I submit a bunch of apps, and I could come away with 0. It doesn't make any sense. I agree really with everything that Deborah just said. I think the area of opportunity, having certainly the large counties, there should be no problem in having the large counties try to decide, try to prioritize and say this app is the top app. Makes perfect sense. I do believe that with, and perhaps a small work group might be a way to do it, of interested people who know the application process very well. We could limit the number of applications, and I think as a developer, if you could limit it to 3 applications, or maybe 5 or 3 or something, you're going to get much better quality deals. I'm going to have to choose on the best projects, and that's all to the good.
Thank you. I'll speak for Florida Housing from my perspective. I know when I joined as executive director in April, I saw immediately, the issue of the lottery, and I want to try and move decision-making away from that. I would say that to Senator Rich that if you do look at our RFA process, it is actually very rare to see everyone who applies that there are no ineligible applicants. Usually because it's a stringent, very technical process, usually there is at least one, for one reason or another, who are ruled ineligible. They don't follow the directions, they don't follow, their development doesn't fall within the guidelines, et cetera, et cetera. So I will say, to that is that it's very, very rare for all applicants to all be qualified. And then, but there is, in my opinion, too many that, it comes to a tie, so I can speak to that. I know that the area of opportunity is something that we have continued because, I think some of the thinking is that in 2011, the Florida legislature pushed a lot of growth management down to local governments, and I think it makes sense for local governments that they want to have a say in how their communities look, and I think we kind of feel that that's an appropriate use in that particular RFA process. I know that there are other times where there are some concerns on the other side that local governments are using it because they don't want affordable housing units in their communities, and we're trying to address that through the RFA process for small and medium counties this year for the 9% tax credits, and doing away with what's called the local government contribution, which is much, much smaller than the area of opportunity. So that's looking to address, and we're running it kind of as a pilot for the small mediums because we think that makes sense, because that seems to be where the technical expertise isn't as strong as some of the larger counties. So that's one of the ways we're looking at addressing that issue. And if we get 300 applications, we're probably going to need to hire some more scorers, and the ones that we have are probably going to quit. But I actually think that we're not going to be overwhelmed with applications just because the local government contribution is done away with, and well, I may eat crow on that. We'll see. So I'll just mention that. Holly?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question. We've been talking a lot about the 9% competitive tax credits. Can you guys explain and maybe describe some bond deals where, I think we years ago saw a lot of bond deals get done, and recently probably next to nothing, and explain those, because those are using the 4% non-competitive credits, which, probably only limited by volume cap.
I'll take a stab at that one. I think the reason that bond deals aren't working as well is because of syndication pricing. There's not enough money to make a deal work. There is excessive cost of issuance fees in a 4% bond deal. And it's just everything significantly costs more when you're doing a bond deal. The credit rate is not fixed. If it were fixed at 4, which I know no one in this room can do anything about, that would be great. Secondly, syndication pricing is down, and they don't typically work in small or medium counties. They do much better in larger counties. But I think that is part of the problem with the bond deal. And if I may just digress back, I wanted to make one comment, and I'll pass it on to them, and that is that when you talk about caps and you talk about leveraging, I'm not a developer anymore, but I played that game. I didn't do it to the excess that other developers did. But when you submit applications, multiple applications, 15 to 20, you know that, and you increase the cost on those applications so that they fall in Group B. So you're gaming the system. You know that you've added cost. So the leveraging in Group B, you're manipulating so that your other deals that you really want to get funded are getting funded, or at least getting in the Group A classification. So not only do you need to continue with the leveraging, you still need to cap the number of applications that you allow to be submitted, because that will in itself stop some of that gaming. I just want to make that comment.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question
Shannon?
on the bond question? Is also part of the reason why bonds aren't as doable these days as in previous is the subsidies that were used to leverage the bonds don't exist as much anymore, both at the state trust funds but also federal affordable housing resources aren't there to tap into outside of Florida housing funding. Is that part part of it?
Right, yeah, on the bond program, you cannot do what I call a standalone bond, which is, you used to be able to make the numbers work with 4% credits plus the bonds, but because of the factors that Kim described, you have to bring other subsidies, so that's where you get into the competitive. Now, in the larger counties, the local governments through SHIP has money that they can supplement, and then there is sale. So what you'll see in the sale round at the state level is most of the, obviously all of those, I think, are being now teamed up with 4% bonds. So if you can win at sale or bring local SHIP money, then you can make a bond deal work. And I'm a big proponent of, that's more certainty. It's just that but those deals are tighter. And the one other thing I just wanted to mention as we're talking about the issues that are keeping us up at night is with what just happened with the hurricanes, our insurance rates are going to go up. And that is directly going to impact how much money we can borrow because they're going to underwrite us on what the new insurance rates. So what that means, we need more subsidy. So when we started this, we needed subsidy, and now we're going to need more. But bond deals will work, but they require a very generous subsidy.
So I just wanted to mention that the last project that we completed was in Miami-Dade, and we were able to do it because local government really wanted to do it. It's in a CRA district, and we were able to use tax-exempt bonds on a high-rise development in Miami with structured parking, which is intuitively is impossible. But because there was a real commitment to doing it, the CRA floated a bond secured by their TIF revenues, and they awarded us $17 million for a project of, call it 160 apartments. Without that, it couldn't be done, but it was able to be done because they were able to bond their TIF. They were also able to do two other projects, and there's a fourth project that they're going to be closing on very soon. So use of CRA, there's been a lot of talk in the state about CRAs, good, bad, and indifferent. But if there's a way for us to encourage these CRA districts to use some of their TIF to be able to free up money for affordable housing, I think that could be a very rich source and be able to use tax-exempt bonds.
I want to just add something that, as we're talking about costs, so the things that are concerning me right now, and you guys can add to this, are construction costs after these hurricanes. Insurance is absolutely concerning. But the other thing that we have no control over right now, but we should at least have out there on the table, is tax reform that's happening on the federal level. Because if our corporate tax rates come down, essentially demand for our credits are going to come down and pricing is going to come down, which again adds to we're going to need more subsidy to make these properties work. I'll give you a really good example of this. The property that I closed on a year ago in Miami-Dade County, I got $1.07 per credit, which is, pretty good. I'm looking right now at doing the phase 2 of it, and my investors are looking at tax reform, and we're talking about less than $1 now. So that same project that I'm going to close potentially 2 years later, I need more gap money for because of what's going on at the federal level. And until that certainty happens, until we know, what we were being underwritten at a 35% corporate rate, we're now talking about a 25 or a 20% corporate rate. So that is causing us gap money. So we're back to Sadowski because that's the way we're going to be able to get these things done. So we've got real cost issues. Is there a fourth one that is keeping y'all up at night? Those are my 3 right now that are.
Well, I'll just add the rent side, the rent's stagnant. For instance, the one community I was talking about that is in downtown Tampa. So we opened that in 2011. Rents have gone down every year. So our residents there have never had an increase in rents because, combination. So area median income, which is basically how our rents are determined, has been pretty much flat. And then we have to deduct utility allowances, which is the cost of the utilities that are paid for by the residents, and they have gone up. So therefore, the rents net to us, that then we have to pay all of the operating costs, the property taxes, the management, and the insurance, which is what's keeping me up again, is that number is getting compressed. And this is an ongoing issue that, you know, we have to look at for how we operate. Because when we build, that's just the first part. Then you got to own these, and as Mark's saying, own them for a long, long time. And that's one thing I just want to point out, the difference between market rate communities. Market rate, most developers are buying, selling within, you know, a 3 to 5 year hold period. We hold these for 15 years. So we have to think about everything from the quality we put in to how we manage, and then all the restrictions we have with our rents. So that's the other part, if you want to add a fourth. That's my fourth.
So I'll add a fifth, that kind of.
Stephanie has a fifth.
It's the operating subsidies that we need to keep our rents where we keep our rents, which are significantly less than what affordable rents are. And those operating subsidies are just getting harder and harder to come by.
Yeah. Well, we are at the lunch hour at noon. Thank you all very, very much for coming and talking with us today and giving us lots to think about and even recommendations that we'll, I think, be moving forward on. Thank you very much for coming today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. We're going to break for lunch for 45 minutes. We'll be back in here at 12:45 to continue discussions with local governments. And Sheila, who is standing over there, I guess will direct us, the members, down to lunch. Thank you so much. We'll see you in 45 minutes.